Hello viewers, and welcome to yet another Warhammer 40,000 Conquest video production. My name is Mitch, and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today, I'm pleased to present you with the very first installment in another brand new series. This time with a focus on guest hosts presenting an analysis and deconstruction of various decks. Though it's far from my strong point, the goal of this series is to remain brief and concise, and while I'll ensure the audio is always top-notch, in the interest of creating these resources quickly, I'll be keeping editing minimal in a visual sense. So while you're watching these videos and assessing guests' decks, consider their reasoning and logic behind each and every card inclusion, and do all of your fellow viewers a favor in leaving a comment, stating both what you agree with and what you'd run differently. So in a sense, hopefully each and every one of these videos can become somewhat of a discussion piece and living deck list. If you enjoy this video or like the premise of this series, remember to hit the like button, ensure you're subscribed, and you're encouraged to share, because the more engagement this content receives, the more viewers are reached, and ever the broader you help grow our Conquest community. And finally, for this very first episode in particular, please let me know what you think of this series, both in premise and execution. And as always, I stay ever receptive to constructive criticism, but with our already long introduction aside, let's get things started with a competitive deck list for one of our first Tyrannid warlords, Old One-Eye. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, but before we delve into our detailed deck analysis and deconstruction, why don't you just introduce yourself and let our viewers know how you're involved in our Conquest community?
All right. Well, thank you, Mitch. My name's Justin Leisner. I am in the Midwest currently, although I'll be moving out to the East Coast in the Maryland area. But I think I started Conquest. I got a hold of one from Gen Con last year,
Sure.
and my friend got one, and we played our single core. We had our doubts, whatever. I went on with it. He didn't. And then I went to Worlds, and I didn't actually go to Gen Con. I just had one picked up. But I went to Worlds, and I had a blast playing it.
Well, absolutely fantastic. This is meant to be the first episode in a new series that's more concise, it's more competitive, more deck-focused, but what exactly is your history in competitive gaming? Worlds is definitely a hell of a thing to show up at.
All right. Well, let's see. So I've played collectible card games probably since junior high, which is going to be something like 20 years ago or more.
Sure.
Yeah. So, I did Magic, I did L5R, I did the old Decipher Star Wars, various other games. L5R, I think, was the first one we actually did competitively. Like, we went to Gen Con for it.
Right.
Friend of mine won one of the guys we went with, he won the Gen Con for 99, I believe,
Wow.
for L5R, which was, did not expect that at all, but happened. And then went into service. After that, I, pretty much stopped doing most things. And then, but while I was stationed in Japan, I picked up a Japanese video card game,
Sure.
which was very interesting, very unique. And then I was playing that a bunch, and you can only play it at the arcade, and yeah, it cost a lot to do that, but it was really fun. And I ended up going into Club Sega one day, and they were having a tournament. I had no idea. I just walked in, and they're like, "Oh, you want to play?" And it was like 30 people there, and I was like, "Yeah, okay." And I ended up winning, being the only not Japanese person playing.
Well, foreigner takes the championship.
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty strong. And then beyond that, I came back here. I played the regular WoW TCG while that was live, and then the minis for their short lives, and then rolled into Netrunner when I saw that, because I used to play the old one, and I thought, oh, this can't be bad.
Right.
and started doing that, and immediately went competitive with that. I won. I got second at a regional for the first year, and first, and fifth, and fourth. I went to 4 regionals.
Wow. Well, I mean, that's a hell of a showing.
Um, I won 3 store championships in a row, and then out of 4, I think that I went to, and went to Worlds. I think I placed 33rd that year, which was 1 spot out of the cut,
Right.
which stunk. So last year, when I went for Conquest and Netrunner, I thought, I'm going to do better this year. That was my goal for Netrunner, unless I made the cut for Conquest because they conflicted. I ended up not making the Conquest cut, although I officially finished, I think, 29th. I was mispaired the second and third round. I won the first match, which was a feature match, actually. It was the first Conquest feature match, maybe ever.
Well, I mean, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I had won the warm-up tournament the day before, so they decided to use whoever I played as the first feature match. So yeah, I won that, but then I got paired as if I lost. And I ended up with that record that was on the cut where, if my strength of schedule is good enough, I get in. If it's not, I don't. But because I got mispaired to people that had lost as opposed to won, as I should have, my strength of schedule was in the toilet. So I did not make the cut. And I believe even if I kept the same record, where I won one and I lost one between those two matches before it got fixed, I believe my strength could have been high enough to put me in at least in the middle of that tiebreak group. And because of people that had dropped to go play Netrunner, that may have put me into the cut.
Well, I can't help but ask, I suppose, what are your plans for this year's Worlds? Are you going to make a reappearance?
This year's Worlds, I am not going.
Oh, well,
It pretty much sold out pretty quick. And even though I did win a regional this year again, so they had a reserve spot, but I just have too much going on with life and moving and all this other stuff that I didn't bother to take it.
right. Well, I had you on today to come and represent one of our newly introduced, fairly tournament competitive warlords. You happen to mention that I believe you recently won a store tournament league kit with this deck,
Yes.
and you decided to run Old One Eye. I suppose before we break into the specifics of the deck, what was just the inspiration there? Why pick one of our new Tyrannid warlords?
Well, everybody decided that if you had Tyranids, everybody was fine and we'd allow it. And someone else was running Swarmlord, and I don't really jive with Swarmlord. And I don't know if he is better or not. A lot of people seem to think he is, but he certainly does not suit my style.
Sure. Well, I mean, right out the gate, a ton of people were saying he was the competitive Tyrannid option.
Right. And I feel Old One Eye is more comfortable for me, much like I prefer Ragnar over Kato. He's more comfortable for me.
Sure.
I would rather go kill warlords than, just run around and play econ game all day.
Well, I suppose what is the specific premise of your deck before we talk about, why you included each and every card? What's kind of the basic overall idea?
Well, yeah, I like Old One Eye, and I'm taking Savage Warrior Prime, and my goal is to bully them on the planets. I'm going to murder command units. I'm going to trigger battle abilities on the planets. And if I can, I'm just going to bully out the first planet as much as possible.
Sure. So just kind of a hyper-aggressive playstyle.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty aggressive. I found that a lot of these units and a couple of the events give a lot of brutality, not the actual brutal world, but just like a lot of savage, like just raw power to these guys.
Right. Well, I mean, just in taking a look at the specific deck list itself, you've got Old One Eye as your Warlord, Savage Warrior Prime as your Synapse unit, you've got 33 different army units, 7 attachments, 9 events, and just a single support. With Old One Eye in particular, he, basically loses half of his damage tokens each time he readies, up to a maximum of once per round. What's some strategy with getting the utmost use out of him as a warlord, including that ability?
So, much like Kugath, One Eye's pretty good at bowling a planet by himself, and in part because of the heal, even more so if you get his attachment, since you can convert that into extra damage. But I actually did not find myself using his react very often while he was in a battle.
Okay.
If he's actually there, a lot of times he got piled up on or just ignored. However, putting his signature unit on a planet like the first planet or the second, where they can fight on their own, or with the Savage Warrior to initiate the battle,
Right.
and then putting Old One Eye farther down the line, whether to command snipe or battle trigger, he can still soak the damage for the Hormagaunts, no matter where he's at. And this gave me a lot of leverage.
Well, definitely. I mean, I could see it being pretty fantastic to spare the Hormagaunts from dying. You snipe off some enemy command units, and then you just regenerate away whatever damage the Hormagaunts would have taken.
Right. And then, yes, and later when you have the battle where Old One Eye is, he kills Rogue Trader, he gets to ready again, and then, which heals him, right? So I definitely got more use of it that way, and used some of the other units to do the actual fighting. And Hormagaunts do more damage than One Eye anyway.
Sure. Well, and I'm sure, all the more use of him is going to become more and more clear once we discuss some of his signature cards. But what was it about the Savage Warrior Prime in particular? You've got 5 different Synapse options. Why go with that one?
Right. Well, I can throw out the one that makes Termagants immediately because I have nothing that synergizes with Termagants except for the Sentry, which is just there as a command unit.
Right.
The one that moves a unit, I have a use for that in my head, but I don't think I'm ready to try and employ it yet.
Sure.
So I'm going to keep that one under wraps. The other one, the one that blasts a unit.
Right, the Blazing Zoanthrope.
Yes, that one. He sounds great, and I tried using him, but he doesn't get a whole lot done. At best, you kill off their guy, but you just tie them on command, and at worst, they just discard something to shield it.
Sure.
Or you don't even do enough damage to kill anything. And then you're trying to infest planets to make them do more damage, and infesting is a pain in the butt.
Right, and I mean, it's not like this deck doesn't have any means of infestation, so...
Right. Yeah. There's not a lot of great ways to do it. You can't come out thinking as a Tyranid, I'm going to infest every planet, because you're not.
Right.
And you might infest a couple planets, or maybe 3 at the most over the course of the game. I think in my case, most games that I infested 1 or 2 at most.
Okay.
I believe.
Just throughout the course of the entire game?
Right. Yes. Just naturally, or where it was advantageous for me to do so. The Venom Thropes, they get jumped on real fast. So they don't get to infest the planet very often, let alone get to actually make use of their bonus resource or card ability.
Right.
But the Spore Sacks are amazing. They will always infest.
Well, you happen to mention that the Venom Thrope Polluter wasn't really doing it for you. The Blazing Zoanthrope wasn't putting out enough damage. What about something like the Stalking Lictor, that 5th and final Synapse unit?
Yeah, so he's the real test. So that 2 command is great. You can run around, you can, steal up command. I don't find myself drawing a lot of cards very often, and I often found myself needing money more than cards.
Right.
But using that guy, I would probably get it. But the route I wanted to take was a little bit emulative of Aunshi and its orbital city.
Okay.
Whereas we all know if Aunshi gets 2 orbital cities, like the entire game is different. Like, he's a menace. Savage Warrior Prime is something like an orbital city. He's going to allow me to trigger 2 planet battle abilities every turn.
Right. And even though he doesn't have command icons, I could easily see him netting you additional cards and resources depending on where he's fighting.
Right. So he often will go somewhere, he won't get the command. He'll kill whoever's there, and then I'll get to do the battle ability. And Old One Eye somewhere else will do the same thing. Ideally, I have actual units on the front planet to take that. You know, and triggering 2 planet abilities a turn can be really nasty, especially if the copy another planet is out.
Right. Well, I can't help but notice you're not running any copies of Fall Back in this deck. How much difficulty do you have keeping him alive?
I have not yet had any problem keeping him alive until the end where I no longer need him and I'm okay for him to die.
Sure.
Um, but I did find towards the end game, if Old One Eye gets bloodied, it's nice to be able to throw that Savage Warrior into the fight and let Old One Eye go somewhere else and just get some command, for that last battle. It's pretty vicious, and I think it puts a lot of pressure on them. Savage Warrior Prime can also be targeted by the Dark Cunning.
Right.
Which, that card is amazing.
Well, I suppose saving that until we ultimately get to it, just because it can target... Oh, no worries at all. But just because it can target so many things, I suppose anything else in particular to mention about Synapse, just before we delve into any of these cards. And really the trick in trying to approach these one by one is there's just so much synergy present, right, especially with the Tyranids.
Yeah, it's really hard to just focus talk on the one thing without right, saying, well, it's because of this that makes him so I like Savage Warrior. I don't think people are as accustomed to dealing with being able to fight 2 or 3 battles a turn.
Definitely not.
And I think a lot of people would have trouble dealing with it. And if worse comes to worse, you can always, if they're just blowing out command, I think much better than Swarmlord, Old One Eye can just dogpile on the front planet turn after turn and just let consumption do the rest of the work.
Right. Well, I suppose just looking at the remainder of your deck here, breaking into some of your army units, you happen to mention those Termagant sentries. You don't have any means of generating tokens.
Right.
It's nice that they've got 2 hit points. Anything worth noting, apart from, 1 resource, 1 command icon?
They are literally just a resource and a command. If there was any better option to fill that slot, I would use it. And promotion might be a better fit. But I decided to, just give them a whirl and see how it goes.
Sure. I suppose, have you experimented much with promotion, just because that's another non-inclusion in this deck?
I think originally I had a couple in, but it wasn't doing me a whole lot of good since I was usually out killing their unit. So I just opted to take it out and put in a different unit instead.
Sure. I mean, at the very least, they're attacking for something, so it helps contribute to that. Mm-hmm. Always be aggressive.
It's a little more sticky than just a promoted unit.
Right.
And to answer your fallback question, I never put fallback in to begin with. I don't think it is that worthwhile.
Well, and certainly if you don't need it, it doesn't hurt not to draw a bunch of dead cards.
Right. I mean, it's always a shield, sure. But I think if you play well enough, I don't think you're going to end up needing it.
Sure. Well, a little earlier you happen to mention the toxic venom thropes, which are smashed into pieces as quick as possible by most opponents, but how do you typically use those? How do you try to keep them safe?
Well, for one, they make for good bait. If I have venom thrope out somewhere, they want to stop it. So if either they're going to put a unit there and they're going to promote over it, in which case when it comes to committing, they're not going to send their Warlord there because they already had it taken care of in their mind. They're going to go somewhere else, right. Which means I can send Old One Eye there. I can still win because he's there and they're not. Now it's infested. Later on I can get things. I can kill off their promoted unit. Warrior Prime, he can go do the battle on the front planet for all I care, or somewhere else.
Right.
That's my best way to protect them. Sometimes you just throw them out as bait, and they may not want to go deal with it, but they're gonna. And then I'm free to go hit 2 other planets.
Sure. Well, I mean, it definitely sounds like that's a pretty devious use for what otherwise seems like a pretty straightforward unit.
Well, it's a kind of a win-win situation. Either they don't mess with it, and I get command,
Right.
I get infestation, I get the bonuses, or they do go deal with it, and I get to do my other agenda without interference.
Sure. Well, how about your only limited card in this deck, the Ripper Swarm? How do you typically get the most out of that unit?
He's just a better Termagant Sentry. You know, you just throw him somewhere. Here's a command, or he's blocking your Rogue Trader. Until I go deal with him. But I have found myself throwing one down at the big battle at the end of the game just for an extra guy.
Sure.
They're pretty straightforward, and it's a limited card. So I didn't want to compete with it with promotions and things like that.
Sure, and I suppose there's not too much to say. I'd imagine it's going to be quite the
No.
staple in Tyranid
Yeah.
decks for a long, long
Yeah,
time to come.
definitely.
It's like, what do you do with this recon drones in your
Right.
Tau deck? But
I put gun drones on them. What else would you do?
exactly. But one of the more divisive inclusions in this deck is the Tyranid Warrior. So it's pretty vanilla, but it's another 2 command unit. How do you typically use that one?
I thought I might be throwing them on not necessarily the first planet, but maybe the second or third, somewhere where you intend for them to get into a fight, but until then, they can do a good job holding the command on the planet.
Sure.
And in large part, that's how it went. But I also found myself just throwing them on the front planet. And they get a lot of attention. I'm surprised. Like, people want to kill them. And 4 body, they usually have to spend, 2, maybe 3 attacks if I got some good shields to get rid of them.
Sure. Pretty durable body, and 2 attack is, far from nothing.
Yeah. And as far as the selection of Tyranid units currently available, it's just a solid unit. I don't see any problem with it. Swarmlord might not want it because I believe their 3 slot is crammed pretty hard with hive mind units.
Right.
But I only have a couple 3-cost units, and it just fits in pretty well.
Well, I suppose we've got some far more interesting and probably a lot more to talk about units coming up soon.
Oh, definitely.
The first of which is your Ravenous Haru specs. You've got 3 copies of a 5-cost elite.
Yeah.
So, how do you do that one? It's like a 3/5. Anything it kills, you generate as many resource tokens as it's worth. How much mileage do you get out of this guy?
So, in hindsight, I would be dropping one of these for +1 of the other elite that's in this deck.
Sure.
That being said, I got pretty good mileage for his 5 cost. I think there was one time where I just played him and he just got smashed. And I definitely regretted that one. However, they went to deal with him and I got to go fight elsewhere.
Right.
But being that he's got 5 body and being elite, there's a lot of things that can affect him. And they see that react and they just do not want you to get anything from that. So they will put a lot of attention on this guy. The fact that he's elite also allows me to use something else with him, which did happen and was very important in one game. And so I think one game, most of the time he killed a cost 1 or 2 unit. But as I mentioned before, I often found myself needing more money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I just threw 3 of these guys in. I was just like, you know what? If they eat anything, awesome. And whatever they eat, you've essentially just reduced the cost of this card. So if he, makes 5 resources, he's almost paid for himself.
Right.
Except for his card slot.
Exactly.
I think one game I ate a Mighty Wraith Knight, which is 6.
That would be a hell of a thing.
Right.
Yeah. And I suppose, it's not as if the Tyranids have been out for maybe more than a month at this point, so certainly experimentation is sure to happen.
Exactly.
And regardless if you'd make changes to this deck or not, at least out the gate, it seems like it performed pretty well for you.
It did.
And the more refinement occurs over time, it's only going to serve to get all the better.
Yeah. There is, just as you said, some of these units are in here, like Sentry, all 3 Hara specs. There are a little bit of experimenting in there, to see what flows, to see what works. But I didn't like these guys as much as I hoped, but I didn't hate them as much either.
Well,
So they're kind of in the middle ground for me.
sure. But you happen to mention that if you could do things over again, you might swap one of these for an additional copy of your Shrieking Harpy. So whether you're including 2 copies, like in this deck list, or 3, they're even more expensive at 6, but they've got that
Yes.
extremely powerful ability where if they get off an attack at an infested planet, they basically tap out each and every opposing unit. I suppose, what's your rationale for 2, for 3? How do you make the most use out of those?
So I think with Harpy in this deck, I'm not convinced that any of these elites will fit into Swarmlord,
Mm-hmm.
but for this deck, where I can infest some planets, which is what the Harpy wants, you want that combat reaction.
I'd say so.
Like, there's no other reason to use this card, but it will win you the game. Whatever battle you are fighting on, the Harpy will win. If they don't have something to immediately like remove it from the battlefield, like a terror, or if they don't have somebody who can get a shot off first and with like a Sicarius' Fury to just kill it, or a Clavex Warleater or something of that nature,
Right.
you win the whole battle.
Well, I suppose, the dream is just kneeling your entire opponent's army, but how often is it that it actually manages to perform like you're hoping it will?
I actually only drew it in the last game of that event, and it won me the game
Well, I
because of the
suppose that
dream.
counts for something, yeah.
He had my opponent, who was Seth Rosen, who's one of the stronger players in the Chicago area.
Right.
He had 2 Mandrakes, two the Eldar Warlord groupie unit
Oh,
Corsair.
the Eldritch Corsair?
Yeah, he had 2 of those, I believe, and then his Warlord. And he was playing Dark Eldar. And obviously the Harpy cannot exhaust the Warlord because it's not an army.
Right.
But he didn't have any elites there. So, and I had initiative. So after his ranged attacks, all I had to do is just attack his Warlord.
Right.
And then all his other units are exhausted. And there's no way, a 2 damage Warlord is going to kill a Shrieking Harpy that has regeneration on it.
Yeah, I would say things start to look down as
Like,
soon
he
as...
would he would literally have had to have attacked 9 times with his Warlord to kill the Harpy.
Right. And I'm assuming he didn't get the chance to?
Uh, it's debatable. He may have been able to kill it if he had used, because it came in with the Warlord, so it was exhausted.
Right.
If he had taken everybody and piled on it that round without letting any of his other units die to anything else I had sitting there, he may have been able to kill it. Maybe. But he opted to kill off other things, and thinking that he wouldn't be able to kill it at all. And that's just how it went.
Sure.
So the Harpy can definitely just straight out win you the battle.
Right. Well, I suppose for players playing against Old One Eye, it's definitely something to look out for.
Definitely.
Especially if you've got, a pivotal battle coming up and
Right.
there's a big fat infestation token sitting there.
It is definitely something that players are going to have to include something to handle. I mean, if you're Dark Eldar and you got a Warleader, you're fine. If you have Kato and you keep a Fury, you're probably fine. But you're going to need something to be able to handle it.
Sure. Well, and I suppose it's all going to depend on the meta, like with the prevalence of players starting to prefer Ragnar over Kato. Maybe they set themselves up unintentionally to just get obliterated by a card like this one. But how about our next inclusion here? Arguably another, super strong, if not Tyranid staple card, the Volatile Pyrovore. You've got another 3 copies here.
So good. The Pyrovore, this is probably the most staple of all staples of Tyranids. Like, this is your rice. This is your bread. You have to have this.
Sure. Well, I suppose, what kind of just awesome scenarios have you seen with with its ability? So as soon as something blows it up, the attacker ends up taking 3 damage in return.
I think my favorite thing for this to kill are the Tau prelates or the
Sure.
prelates. Like the guy comes down, he wants to kill it, but he's gonna have to throw a shield to stay alive,
Right.
and then he's weakened later. I can kill him off with anything.
Right.
Um, that's my best. Even if the Warlord wants to kill it, he's got to take probably half his life in damage just to do it. And if you get to swing with this guy before they kill him, it's almost like you've made double value off this card.
Sure. I mean, it reminds me strikingly of like a Zarathar's Flamers.
Yeah, I could see that in some way. I would think I would most relate it to a carnivore pack on a
Yeah.
Tau, except that it has a command icon, which just I think if the carnivore pack had a command icon, that card would be seeing play in every Tau deck. It's still good. I still see it in a fair number of Tau decks that I play against, but I think it would be staple.
Sure.
And I think just by having a command, this guy does it.
Yeah, I mean, every time I look at this card, I just think it's so ironic that in tabletop 40K, at least when I played during 5th edition, when this model first came out, it was like the most garbage Tyranid unit. And then as soon as this card is printed, it's just like solid gold. So
Yeah, thing's amazing.
it's just funny. But earlier, you alluded to Old One Eye's signature army unit, the Lurking Hormagaunts. They're 3 attack, single hit point. They can transfer their damage to Old One Eye.
Yes.
How exactly do you use those to their, absolute pinnacle benefit?
The best benefit for the Lurking Hormagaunt is exactly the reaction on him. So they want to fight against units that can only swing for 2 or less damage, so that you can always shift it to 1 eye, and these won't die.
Right.
You could put a regeneration on these. It's not wrong. You have some wiggle room then. I've done that a couple times. It's worked out fine. But the best use of these is to be in a fight where Old One Eye is not. And it happened many times. They attacked into him. They're like, I'm going to do 2 damage to your Hormagaut. I'm like, okay, I'm going to put it on one Old Eye, or Old One Eye, 4 planets over here.
Right.
And they're like, oh, you can do that? I'm like, yeah. So now I'm going to punch you for 3.
Yeah, that just hurts. Any 2-cost unit with more attack than it costs, that's just painful.
And then, if you go into the next combat round, they're looking at it, they're thinking the same thing. They're like, well, now if I punch him, he's just going to soak it again, and my other guy's going to die. So they just run away.
Sure. Or, I mean, if somebody's bound and determined to kill it, and they just waste some absurd amount of damage, if they end up killing off a 1-hit point unit with 4, 5, or more attack, then you still stand to gain quite a bit of value from these.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And, paying 2 for a command and 3 attack is okay in my book. I see no fault in these Hormagaunts. I believe that this signature unit is far better than the Swarmlord signature unit.
Sure. Well, how about our second Hormagaunt option here? You've got 3 copies of the Scything Hormagaunt. They automatically infest whatever planet they're deployed to.
That's correct.
How do you typically use those?
These are the heralds of the Harpy.
Right.
Now, probably normally, these would be I would consider these staple also, because they're just a 2/2/2 command unit. I mean, you really can't get much more vanilla than that.
Right.
And, oh, well, you know what? They infest the planet too. Oh, that's great. That turns on a lot of things for me. I have no problem with these guys at all whatsoever. They enable, like we said, the Harpies, which are game ending. And the Hunter Gargoyles, also good. And even with Dark Cunning, you can save some money, and there's something else in here that uses Infestation. I guess Spore Burst, if you wanted to. I actually never used a Spore Burst. They were always 2 shields for me. If there was any other 2 shield option that I could fit into that slot, I probably would.
So no recursion of the Pyrovores?
It never came up. There was one turn where I wanted to recur a Tyranid Warrior, but the planet wasn't infested.
Well, it's going to be definitely interesting in time to see, once we start getting more infestation options and all sorts of other things, just, what a tricky balance it is. just because it's yet another thing for the Tyranids to consider. The Swarmlord has to think about hive mind specialization. Maybe Old One Eye has to focus more on infestation, but it's just so many different variables for a Tyranid player here to juggle. I guess something I was wondering about is, with those Hormagaunts, did you ever, like, hold on to them to wait until there was some synergistic effect, or are you pretty much okay with just playing them whenever?
If I believe that the game is going to go to a point where I'm going to need to be able to infest and drop a harpy, then I would be inclined to hold on to them for as long as possible. But on the same note, I can get a virulent spore sac, and that's just better.
Right.
Those are much better in the fight. And I can throw the Hormagaunt somewhere else, and then let the spore sac do the setup work.
Sure. Well, you mentioned your 3 copies of Hunter Gargoyles. They can kind of swoop in like a Wild Rider squadron to an infested planet.
Absolutely.
They're very fragile, but they hit for 2 at a cost of 1. How do you get the most use out of those?
So Hunter Gargoyles are awesome. If they had a command, they'd be seriously like way too strong. Yeah, but what I want to do is I want to put these on later planets, and I want to have the planets that I intend to fight over infested. So being on later planets when I throw my Synapse or my Warlord over there to go cremate some command units and win a battle, and, trigger some awesome ability, I got some Gargoyles there to help me along the way. But if I need them at the earlier planet to fight, they can hop on over.
Sure.
Which you can't fault flexibility in any format. Like, I mean, Baharoth is probably the most flexible, warlord. But Hunter Gargoyles are, I think, the only thing within Tyranids that just have a move option other than the one Synapse unit.
I think so.
So I don't think I would use these in Swarmlord because I wouldn't be infesting anything. But I would definitely consider these staple for One Eye.
I suppose, is it just kind of a careful balance sometimes between, I guess the opponent's deck you're facing and your number of resource tokens, and whether or not you have initiative based on if you do play them out or just hold on to them?
Well, if I don't have anything infested, it doesn't really do me any good to throw them down since they have no command and they only have 1 hit point.
Right.
At that point, they would pretty much just be fodder. But, I mean, even if you just have spore sacs on the field somewhere, they can threaten to infest the planet at any time. And then you can use the gargoyle to either attack into that place or to run away from where they are. Maybe they just don't want Kato to kill them, so you infest something over here and you run away.
Right. Well, I mean, like you said, definitely versatile and flexible. Hard to find too much wrong with something like that.
I think, yeah, if you just look at them as a 2/1, they're a Chimera token. And Chimera tokens nobody's afraid of until you have Chimera Den.
Right.
So being able to move, 2/1s around is pretty good.
Well, definitely. And you mentioned that they synergize perfectly with the virulent spore sacs. You've got another 3-copy card here. How do you use that one?
You might think that you would just throw these on a planet that has like pirates and traders just to stall the one, so he has to put another one down, then you can blow up and try to kill both of them.
Right.
But I actually prefer to use them wherever the fighting is. So much like the Tyranid warrior, I may not want to put it on the first planet unless I intend to fight over it. But wherever I intend to fight, I would rather have one of these down than a scything Hormagaunt, because 1 damage to all their units is just great. It's wonderful.
Sure.
And then to kick off all the infesting.
Sure, and I mean, 1 damage to Tyranids is pretty scarce. They've got, like, I guess 2 area effect options I can think of off the top of my mind, so...
Right, unless you get they got this, the Venom Cannon, and then there's the Hive Mind unit that
yeah,
could
the
I believe.
Pyrovore spore launcher,
Right.
so this makes a 3rd. And then with the infestation token, it definitely seems like there's a hell of a lot of good reasons to throw 3 copies of this in this deck.
Yeah, I can't think of a reason not to use this at all. I just can't.
Well, then it makes sense that it's in there.
Right.
I suppose next you've got 7 different, 7 total attachments. The first of which is the Great Scything Talons. So it boosts Old One-Eye's HP up by 1. It gives additional attack value when he regenerates. Do you typically use that offensively or for shields?
Well, I'll be honest. I've never drawn it.
Well, there you go.
So
Theoretically,
I couldn't really tell you, but if I had it in an opening hand, I would definitely play it. And I would just have Old One-Eye just run around and murder things even more.
just because you've, played Old One-Eye a few different times, at least, is it often that if you would have had it in play, it would have, given some significant benefit?
Well, going to 7 HP is nice. That puts him on par with more of the Warlord killing warlords, such as Ragnar and others. But the react, being that I haven't used his heal ability very much,
Right.
I'm not sure how much mileage you're going to get out of that. But, I think before it gets to kind of the mid-late game when there's not many units on the board, I think that's the best time for it to shine.
Sure.
Where he's just, you hit me, I hit you. And I think it'd be all right. But being that I never drew it, and, I did win my games, a couple of them were close or contingent on something. But, at this point, it might as well just be 3 shields.
Right. Well, I suppose next, speaking of shields, we've got the 2 shield value Heavy Venom Cannon. It gives +2 attack, it costs 3, but it gives you the option of conferring an Elite Armor Bane or Area Effect 2. How do you typically make use of this card?
So, initially, I put these in because I wanted more shields. And then, being that I have the Harpy and the Haru specs, I have options. I can put it into play. Most of the time, this is just a 2 shield card.
Right.
However, it did win me 1 game. I had it on a Haru specs, and I used it for the AoE, and then the Haru specs being exhausted now, my opponent chose to ignore it and kill other units, and then I used a Dark Cunning to ready him and AoE 2 again.
That's cold-blooded.
Since the bonus it gives lasts until end of phase.
Right.
Right. Unfortunately, you can't use it twice to get AoE 4, but that's fine.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you snuck in your Area Effect
Right.
4 regardless, so...
Yeah. I think earlier in that match, it allowed him to gain Armor Bane and eat the Wraith Knight.
Sure. Well, and whether you're using it for shields, that's fine, but it's definitely got some powerful corner case uses, and there's just so much synergy, so much combo potential inherent in this deck. Even before opponents adjust to Tyranids, there's just so many nasty surprises and combos you can use against them.
There's so much nastiness going on, and it just feels like you're being overrun. You're just like, they're just crazy bug Tyranid things running me over, and now they got this big-ass cannon. And I think we could agree that most decks like to have an AoE option.
Oh, sure.
Right? Especially now, if Swarmlord is the popular thing, you would expect to see Katos, you'd expect to see maybe more like attack squads and daring assault squads and gun drones. You're gonna see things with AoE, and this is really no exception. The deck needs an AoE option. Here it is. Definitely. It's super expensive, but at least it's there.
Sure, and if you're not facing stuff that requires AoE, it still gives a base attack bonus. It still lets you have Armor Bane, so
right.
It's just amazing how much this one card can do.
Yeah, it is rightly costed at 3. If it'd be 2, it'd be a steal.
Sure. Well, speaking of steals, next up you've got 3 copies of Regeneration. It's 1 resource, adds a couple points of HP, and lets you pull 2 damage tokens off attached unit each and every round. I suppose, what are your thoughts for this one?
This is regen is one of the 2 MVPs of the Tyranid card pool, I believe.
Right. It
Um,
seems like people are pretty fond of this one.
it's it is so good all the time, every time. Uh, I mean, you have the obvious +2 health. You get to remove 2 damage, every round. It's super nice. Like, it's great. I mean, what is something similar? The hostile environment suit on the Imperial Guard.
Right. I think that's what, one resource for 3 HP?
Right, but it doesn't give you the ability to remove damage, and I think this giving you 1 less HP, but giving you that ability, hugely better.
I would agree with you.
Plus, it's a condition, so things that can't take war gear aren't affected by this.
Right.
And the other great thing about this is just to play it during deploy phase, and then to just use it right away. You've just stalled out 2 actions during the deploy phase to see what your opponent's doing.
Right.
It's amazing. I can't. There's really not a whole lot you can say about this card. I mean, it does what it obviously does, but the impacts of those are huge.
Well, really the only other thing I can think of to ask is what do you typically affix this to? Like, what's the typical target?
Well, whatever you want to keep alive is the best target.
That makes sense.
I needed that harpy that one game, so I put it on the harpy. Like, if the harpy doesn't live, I lose. Other times, I'll put it on a Tyranid warrior. 6 HP is nice. Effectively 8 with the heal.
Right.
Sometimes I put it on the lurking Hormigons just to make them that much more difficult to kill. I think one game I put it on the Volatile Pyrovore. Just like, you want to work really hard to take this 3 damage? Go ahead.
Sure. I mean, just like you're saying, it's really hard to find any fault to this at all.
Yeah.
And if you can throw this on a flying unit, it's just absurd.
Right. There's no downside to this card that I can think of.
Right. Well, on to your events. You've got a grand total of 9, the first of which is 1 copy of Consumption that you mentioned earlier. So how do you use this card, and why just 1 copy?
So I initially put in more because I was thinking I would dogpile the front planets more often and then just use these to slaughter, their units across the game.
Right.
But I found myself using it less and less, so I cut it down to 1, and also I wanted to fit in other things. But much like Doom or maybe Exterminatus, it's kind of nice to have that 1 as a possible out or a threat. There was a couple times I definitely heavily considered playing it during a game where he did kind of that. He played a unit out somewhere, not on the first planet. And then I put a regen out, and he played another unit, and I used my regen, and he played another unit. And then I thought, wow, this is a really good time to use Consumption because I don't have any units on the field. They're all at HQ. I could entirely wipe these guys, or I could use this money to put more guys, on the front planet or wherever I wanted to go. Ultimately, I decided against it because I only needed, I think, 1 or 2 planets. I only needed the front 2 planets to win.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought me spending this to wipe out his guys somewhere that I'm not even going to care about, they're just going to get him some command maybe. I just decided against it. But I think either way would have been right.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of, how it went out.
Well, I mean, it's definitely nice to have that option, but I think it's important, too, that you don't overextend yourself just to, flex your muscles needlessly and blow up a bunch of stuff if it's completely irrelevant to your victory condition.
4 resources isn't cheap, but, much like Doom, if you have a good opportunity, it can totally swing the game.
Definitely. So, I mean, it's not like you're going to be putting out a ton of units with this deck. You've got a lot of elites. You're not throwing tokens all over the board. So,
right.
If you can force your opponent to sacrifice a bunch of stuff, great. If it's unnecessary, then, who cares? It's a shield icon.
If I felt there was a better option that I would get use out of, I would probably use it. But this is more or less a shield with the edge case that it might swing the game.
Right. Well, I suppose a much more, always or often useful card, you've got 3 copies of Dark Cunning, so it allows you to basically just ready target unit. what do you typically use with that one? How do you get the most use there?
So the best use you're going to get out of Dark Cunning is to use it with Savage Warrior Prime. You can't use it with your Warlord.
Right.
And there was more than one time where that slipped my mind for a moment. And it cost me a little bit of tempo or something else, or I just had to rethink my plan. But this, along with Old One Eye's signature event used on your Synapse unit, is just crazy. And you also have the option of using this on whoever you put the heavy Venom Cannon on.
Right.
This, I would consider Dark Cunning the other MVP card, along with regeneration for Old One Eye.
I suppose, is it very often you actually manage to play this at an infested planet?
I think it was about 50%.
Okay.
Yeah, I would think it was about half and half there. It's nice when it happens, but it can't always happen.
Sure. And I mean, if you've got your Synapse unit swinging for 6 a second time,
Yeah.
maybe that's worth 2 resources.
Yeah, this strictly falls into one of those cases where, you don't want to just use it right away. You want to wait until the target that you want to kill has exhausted and has no way to get out. It's really nothing different than, oh, did you just swing with your Warlord? Okay, I'm going to drop pod. I'm going to play this eager recruit. I'm going to play this other eager recruit, and just smash his face.
Exactly.
It's right along the same lines. You hurt him a little bit with something else, and then they think they're all safe because you're all exhausted, and then you just start Dark Cunning the crap out of your Synapse or your big unit, and you just murder things.
Definitely. I mean, it's going to be kind of a million different uses where it could be absolutely fantastic, but it just all serves to make it an extraordinarily powerful card.
Right. This is the Archon's Terror of Tyranids.
Sure. Well, and you mentioned you've of course got 2 copies of the signature Ferocious Strength. It's 1 cost. Your Warlord or Synapse unit gains Brutal until the end of the combat round. How do you typically use that one?
Well, obviously you can only use it with 2 guys.
Right.
And you just let them get hit. They're gonna punch the Synapse unit every chance they get. So most games he was running around with at least 2 damage on.
Sure.
So swinging for 4 is far different than swinging for 2. And Old One Eye along the same lines. If they can put a little damage on him, they might do it. So this card's never bad.
Well, do you typically save it for that Dark Cunning combo, or is it just whenever it's most convenient?
I will save it as much as possible, but if I have a chance to bloody or kill a Warlord or some unit that is loaded up with like gun drones or some, horribly threatening thing.
Right.
If it has to be killed, I'll use it.
Well, I certainly don't think anybody could fault you for that.
Yeah. That's the thing. I think in most cases you want to save things for, when it's absolutely necessary. You don't want to gamble unwisely.
Well, sure. And then I suppose our last event here, we've got 3 copies of the Tyrannid Drop Pod Assault analog, the Spore Burst.
Yeah.
And you said you haven't really seen a lot of use, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't used it. You would think it's good value. You're paying 2, you're getting a 3-cost unit. But again, I only have 2 3-cost units. I have a variety of 2-costers, which even then is fair. It's 2 for 2. But the infested planet part is key, and more often than not, this card is 2 shields.
Right.
Which I'm perfectly fine with. I need shields.
Right.
You need some shields.
But I suppose at the moment you're just kind of counting down the war packs until you get another 2 shield option.
Yeah, even if there was a better thing than Heavy Venom Cannon, I would replace that, or maybe some copies of it. But Spore Burst I would probably remove entirely.
Right.
Or they could introduce more infesting options, in which case Spore Burst gets better.
Definitely stands to reason.
Yeah.
I suppose our very last card in the deck here is your one and only support. We've got the signature 3-cost Awakening Cavern. It's just action, ready target unit. I suppose, do you often play this one?
I think I drew this once or twice and got it into play one of those times, and it's obscene. It's essentially Aunshi's support card, except you can do it to anything. It has no restrictions whatsoever.
Right.
So again, if you use Ferocious Strength on, One Eye who's got a few damage on him, you can use the Cavern to double tap him. This is a permanent Dark Cunning. This is what this is.
Right.
And you just can't say anything bad about that. It's absurd.
Sure. I mean, the more effects you can stack, like
Yeah.
Synapse unit with 4 damage, Ferocious Strength, multiple Dark Cunnings, and Awakening Cavern, and
Yeah.
you just annihilate
Elite
everything.
with Venom Cannon, just AoE, AoE. It's
Right.
like every game I wanted to draw this card just because of how good it is.
Well, I suppose, just theoretically, thought experiment here. Let's say you start the game with it in your opening hand. How long do you think you'd typically wait before playing it?
Oh, I'm playing it right away. That's my first action.
Sure. Well,
One, it's going to stall them for the deploy one time, and that's probably one of the main problems I have with the deck, or the downsides of playing Tyranids, is that 6/6 start. So you typically end your deploy phase fairly quick.
right.
But yeah, I'm just going to play it, and I'm just going to, pretty much just throw it in their face. I'm like, yep, I can bully the crap out of you with this Warlord, so go ahead. Do what you
Well,
want to do.
absolutely fantastic. And I've got to say, as somebody that was kind of, hedging their bets and hoping that the Tyranids would ultimately be worth playing, it seems like they've turned out pretty well to start, and hopefully they only stand to get better in time. Taking this deck all together overall, what do you think some of the absolute best, strongest points are?
Your units are pretty tough. Along with your Warlord and your Synapse running around. I mean, obviously a Ripper Swarm is going to get murdered,
Sure.
but most of these units are going to are fairly hard to get rid of. And, the Warlord and the Synapse themselves, they're the biggest thing people have to adjust to, is that extra guy running around. You can essentially figure that your Synapse unit has costed you 1 card and 1 resource to start with.
Right.
And they're a great value for that. I still miss having 7 resources to start, though.
Sure. Well, and I'm sure you miss, just like you said, that additional deploy action.
Right. I mean, a lot of times I only get to put out 2 or 3 things on the first turn, whereas other people are putting out 4. But, I get to run around, kill them, and hopefully they run out of, guys to repopulate with.
Right.
I don't know. A lot of cases, though, I would be really having a hard time if I use anybody other than Savage Warrior. The ability to trigger the 2 battle actions off planets each turn was immense. Just right out the start. I think one guy, I tortured him because you had the 1 damage planet
Mm-hmm.
and then the copy planet, right?
Right.
So and he was playing Ouchie, and 2 turns straight, I sent one of my guys to each of those to trigger them.
Ouch.
And he would be battling over the front planet because he put Borcon recruits and things like that, right? And so even if I didn't kill him, I would just put maybe get some damage on him. They go home, and then when we get through these battles, I get to do 2 damage to his whole HQ.
Sure, and I mean, whether they're ethereals that just bounce back or they're
Exactly.
just there from, being at an earlier planet,
Mhm.
that is extremely nasty.
Yeah, and that was far more potent than as soon as I spotted it and did that, I was like, oh, this game's over. This is absurd. And even with the heal planet on board, which he used, like just having the flexibility to do those damage spots wherever I needed them,
Sure.
it was crazy. And when I played Seth, I looked like I was going to fight over the front planet. He went there and he did some good damage on that planet. I give him that, But I took out some guys too. But more importantly, my Synapse and my Warlord went to the discard 1 random card planet and the copy planet,
Oh,
and we emptied out the last 2 cards in his hand.
ouch.
And that set him back for the next turn, which allowed me to get ahead. And he was playing Urian, but he's more like a Hypex deck.
Sure.
And I killed the first Hypex unit, and he was unable to draw another one. which, with the Harpy involved, led to my victory.
Well, very well done. And especially considering players try not to hold on to garbage, that random discard can be really, really painful.
Yeah. In my case, I didn't care what I got as long as his hand was empty.
Right.
You can do so many things triggering 2 battle abilities.
Well, it's it's going to be interesting too once we start to see Barzul and his Keru
Oh,
Arameus.
yeah.
So
Yes, I'm looking forward to that.
definitely.
I
Well,
love his support card. Yeah.
what are some of the weaknesses of this deck? Like, how could an opponent try to answer what you're doing? How could they try and counter you?
So the weaknesses are, as I said, that first turn, you don't get many deploys per turn typically.
Right.
Being that I'm using the Savage Warrior, it's a little hard for me to win command. Yes, I'm actively out there killing yours, but I'm not necessarily winning the commands either.
Right.
So it's more like I'm trying to bring you down to my level of income, and if I can do that, I think I have a good advantage. But if I fail in that attempt, I'm going to have a hard time. I'm not going to be able to pay for these cards. Getting money can be a pain sometimes. I'm actually happy when the planet spread shows more money than it does card bonuses. Most players, as we all know, will go for the card bonuses. Just the value of drawing shields is better.
Right.
Uh,
But with the cost curve of your deck being what it is.
Yeah, but with me, I see a 2-resource planet. I want it. So I put a guy there. I hope you don't mess with him, and then I go kill your other guys. Everybody who's a Tyranid wins. Things like any kind of instant removal, war leaders, all the terrors, those kind of things, those would be a pain in the ass. Because typically, I may have various smaller units, but when it comes to the battle that matters, I'm going to have some large elite there also. Mm-hmm. And the removal of that card before he gets to do anything would probably cripple me.
Sure.
Because, Tyranid, I don't have any way to get him back into the battle.
Well, I suppose, whether you've had experience going up against them or it's just theory at this point, how do you think this deck does against some of our current, top-tier decks?
I think... so let's see. Top tier we would consider probably Kith Choke is probably a mainstream.
Sure.
Space Marine, either of them, really. Aounshi can be pretty explosive.
And I think a lot of Tyranid players kind of struggle against Zarather sometimes.
Yeah. So, in part, I give Old One Eye an advantage because of the popularity of other things. So, when people are fearing Swarmlord, they're going to play things to kill Swarmlord.
Right.
Which gives Old One Eye an advantage. So if you're playing, attack squads and all these things because you're worried about lots of tokens, that's good for me. I don't care if you use AoE 1. It doesn't really bother me.
Sure. A Daring Assault Squad would be a fantastic snack for a Haru specs.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. AoE 2 is a little more dangerous, but
sure,
it's also more expensive. And it's almost like, it's really just a meta call, I guess, with what's popular versus what you bring out. I'm not sure it would do very well against Kith Choke. Because I'm not pulling in a lot of extra resources off command, and if they deny me the one place where I get it, or one of the 2 places I get it, it could be really serious. The other disadvantage of Old One Eye is that not having Termagant tokens, I'm not playing clogged with corpses.
Right.
And that is a really, really great event. And the ability to remove support or, whatnot is just, it's really great just to be able to do it at a moment, any notice for free, just by throwing out some tokens you don't care about. It's an amazing removal that I do not have access to. And I also, Tyranid, at least this one, does not have access to anything. There's nothing I can do to stop your guy from doing what he does if he gets to do it first.
Right.
I don't have a combat action that just blasts a guy or removes him from the fight. It doesn't exist. I have to attack him. So if you are plotting your battles where you have initiative, it is a major advantage for you, which is why I try to plot my battles where I have initiative, so that I can attack you before you might be able to do anything.
Sure. Well, I suppose just any final pieces of advice regarding how to play this deck in a tournament context where, things are super competitive?
You're going to have to leverage your Synapse, because that is the advantage of playing Tyranids. You get a Synapse unit to start with. And nobody else does that. And he's fairly disruptive and or beefy. And if you don't leverage it, why are you playing Tyranids?
I mean, it sounds like that's an absolutely integral part of your playstyle here. Like,
Yeah.
if your Synapse unit were to die early, it seems like this deck would completely fall apart.
Yes, it's pretty bad. And to some extent, your Synapse and your Warlord protect each other.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we're committing, most opponents will go for whatever place gives them the best command advantage. Or if they want to win the front planet, they'll go there if they need to have initiative or something of that nature. But if they're trying to kill your Warlord, they might end up going where your Synapse went, because they may think, oh, well, Justin's going to send his Warlord over here because he wants to win command, maybe, and he wants to kill my command unit. And that's probably true. But I could just send my Synapse unit there to do that.
Right.
And then my Warlord can go to the front, steal the initiative, win the battle, and you're over here fighting my Synapse, which I care less about than, Old One-Eye himself.
Sure.
Plus, it's actually more advantageous for me that you fight against Savage Warrior Prime, because I can target him with Dark Cunning.
I mean, there's definitely a ton of just card synergy to back him up.
Yeah. If your Warlord goes there, you have initiative, obviously, because you have a Warlord.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to punch him. He's going to take, let's say, 2 damage from, any Warlord that wants to hunt. So I got 2 damage on. If I Ferocious Strength, that puts me to 4. I punch you back for 4. If I Dark Cunning, you're bloody.
Sure. I mean, even if your opponent, say, attacks you back, you take additional damage, and then you Dark Cunning, it hurts even more.
Right. I think they're going to be, in my opinion, so far, Old One-Eye seems underestimated. And I think until the Deluxe actually is released and people get more experience with it, I think they're going to underestimate Tyranids in general for a little bit. They're a lot more tricky than you might think.
Well, I mean, I definitely agree, and it seems like between the Swarmlord, between Old One-Eye, they're radically different playstyles. You definitely have to be running a fairly dramatically different deck to try and tackle both of these, unless you're, just trying to do some sort of all-comers style deck. So
right.
It just certainly seems like the Tyranids have got 2 really interesting, very different options just right at the onset of things.
That being said, I think I have only won 1 out of 10 games with this deck against my Ragnar deck.
Well, I guess, what is it exactly that, makes it so difficult for you?
He is just hard to kill. You can't. Like, he gets that free damage, and then he's got much better grasp on command. Space Marines, and other, like, orcs, they have pretty beefy units. They're hard to pick off.
Sure.
And that their Vengeance event out of the Deluxe is super good. The one where if one of your Space Marine units dies, you can pay 1 and ready one of your other units.
Right.
That card's really good. Like, that thing has Honored Librarian written all over it.
Yeah. And I mean, even though you run a lot of pretty durable stuff in this deck, an additional, 4 attack value or more coming in
right.
really, really hurts.
Things that do 2 or less damage, I can handle those pretty well. But when you get to 4, things get into the hurt zone.
Well, I suppose just any other closing thoughts, any final bits of advice or tips?
I think Tyranids are pretty fun. I like playing them. I still haven't found a Swarmlord build that I like playing, but I think it's out there. And I don't, at least as far as Old One-Eye is concerned, I'm not sure if he is better against all of the top, tier decks at the moment,
Hmm.
but I definitely give him a chance just because of the Synapse and being able to hit 2 planets. You can't discount that, and Awakening Cavern is just like dropping a Chimera Den where the whole game changed. The entire game's different. It's just that powerful.
Well, definitely. And I mean, it just seems like the Swarm Lord has so many different kind of finicky effects where so much has to be going right for him to really be a powerhouse. And Old One Eye just has so much reliable strength.
Yeah.
Like, it just seems as though the pieces in this deck are strong individually, and then if you can combine them, it just gets absurd.
Like the 2 things I hate about Swarmlord or using Swarmlord is the first thing I don't like is if you send him to the first planet or the 5th planet, you're losing the generation of 1 term again because you're missing an adjacent planet on one end. So he just has that natural feel. Like if I'm sending him to planet 1, I feel it's wrong because I'm not getting the most out of him. The other worst thing about him that I really, really don't like is if the planet comes up that says if you have fewer units than your opponent, you get the 3 resources or cards. You have to defend the crap out of that planet because there is no way as a Swarmlord you are ever going to get to trigger that planet.
Right.
And if the copy planet is up, you can't defend both.
Well, I mean, definitely just having to make sure that you don't have an unlimited number of those hive mind specialization units, and those tokens certainly aren't going to do a whole hell of a lot just by themselves. So it just seems like, especially in like that kind of situation, and it'll be curious to see once Planetfall comes out and we have to start paying so much more attention to just the planet icons in addition to the abilities.
Mm-hmm.
Old One Eye being able to bounce himself all over, being able to use the Savage Warrior Prime. I'm just very curious as to whether, Old One Eye is ultimately going to be the Tyranid of choice. It seems like people were so hyped up, so excited about the Swarm Lord, but now, slowly but surely, people are starting to come around. So,
Well, people like slivers. They just want everything to build on them, and it's almost like they're playing SimCity. They're like, I get this guy, and then I get this guy, and he gets +2 HP, and then I can do this, and he gets this, and now my token is like 5/5 ranged AOE 3 or something.
right,
And you're like, okay, that's great, you've lost.
right.
Because by the time you've done that, you've lost the game.
Sure, exactly. I mean, if you can pick apart one of those linchpins like Archon's Terror away,
Yeah.
the integral piece, and then all those tokens are so weak and
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable, it's just going to be fascinating to see how the Tyranids evolve.
Yeah. It is fun, though, playing with the guy that makes all those tokens. I'm not discounting that. It is just, you really feel like you're swarming.
Oh, for sure. I have very fond memories of the Sliver Queen back in the day.
Yeah.
So. Well, I suppose anything else you want to toss out there before we wind things down?
I don't think I have anything specific about Tyranid-related things that I can think of. I just want to say it's very important in Conquest that you plan in advance. Don't just sit there staring at the wall for the next turn and then think about what you're going to do after you draw your cards. Try to plan out which planets you're going to have to fight for, which planets you're going to have to trigger. What are you going to do if the planets flop and someone can win in the first 3 battles. What I like about this game is that you can't really just make an aggro deck or a control deck because the planet flop determines the course of the whole game.
Right. I mean, it's just so much. This is probably the most stressful game I've ever played, just because there's so many different variables you not only have to take into consideration, but they're also, different each and every game. They're always changing as the, game develops.
Yeah, and that gives you your part of your great replayability is just like, oh, well, the last game I was able to bully out the first 3 or 4 planets and win because the colors lined up. But in this game, nobody can win until planet 5. I have to take on some kind of new strategy. I got to fight for the planets that are important and try to mitigate the ones I can't win. And when you sitting there and you're thinking for like 5 minutes of dead silence with your opponent on just where you guys want to put your warlords, it kind of blows my mind because it's like I can go here and that's good for me unless he goes over here or there, and then I need to go here. You're doing all these things, trying to find the best option, and it's sometimes hard. Like there may not even be a best choice.
Sure.
But you pick what you think is the best one. You hope they went to where you think they're gonna go, and hopefully it works out for you. It's about the best you can do, and that's why I like it. If you make those plans, and if things kind of work out that way or pretty close to how you thought it would, you feel highly rewarded at the end.
Well, I mean, most definitely, and I suppose before we ultimately bring this video to a close, do you just want to maybe let our viewers know where they might be able to interact with you if they've got questions about this deck, about Tyranids as a whole?
Well, they can use I guess they could use the Facebook page that we're on. What is this one here?
I think it's the Conquest LCG Facebook group.
Yes. The Warhammer 40k Conquest LCG. I'm in there. Since I'll be moving to the East Coast, I will also be on the Capital Area Warhammer 40k Conquest page or group. I'm also in the Conquest Chicago group, but obviously I'm moving. I'll still stay in the group, but I won't be in that actual area anymore.
Sure.
I have yet to locate. I have yet to move, and then I have yet to locate the actual game stores in my area, and I don't know what my schedule is going to be able to accommodate. But I'm going to try to hit the various conquest nights if they have them during the week that I can get to out there.
Well,
but
sounds
probably it.
Good to me. But Justin, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for being one of the scarcely few people in our community willing to step up and represent Old One Eye. So
I think there's a shadow group of players. A lot of people look to the people that won nationals and won worlds, or their regionals in their areas, and they look to see what those players are doing, what they're creating, what their advice is.
Right.
But there's like a shadow group of everybody that almost made it. The people that made the top cut, or the people that almost made the top cuts, or the people that do consistently. They make the cuts or real close to them in every event they get to.
Sure.
That it's just, always the bridesmaid kind of deal.
Exactly.
Right? And I don't think there's much difference between the people that are winning and the people that are getting like 8th place or 10th place.
Sure.
These major events.
I mean, who's to say there's no luck involved in a card game?
Right. There definitely is. I think there's far less luck involved in this than other games. But
sure. But as you yourself have experienced with, tournament mismatching.
I love playing tournaments. I love it. It's like if you play the game casual, you're like, and you're just playing a one shot. When you play a tournament, it's like it has an RPG element of you get better as you go, and you have your progress.
Exactly. I was just mentioning that, even if you've got the best laid plans, the most, fantastically built deck, like you experience being paired against the wrong opponents and different things like that, or if you've got a deck where it's almost perfect, but just one Warlord really picks it apart, if you've got multiple games up against that one Warlord, purely by chance, you could get knocked out of the tournament. By that alone.
That was my Worlds experience. I was like, man, the worst thing that could happen is I run into a bunch of Shadow Sun players and they all get out their communications array and negate my Eldorath ability.
Right.
I played 3 of the, I think, 8 Shadow Suns at Worlds.
My God.
Or no, 4. I played against 4. I beat one of them because he did not get the array.
Wow.
I think all 3 of my losses were to Shadow Sun because of that stupid support.
Right. And it's not like there are a lot of players playing Shadow Sun, so...
No, Shadow Sun's awful. It's the worst, like, comparatively, especially to Aonshi, but I was just like, oh, man, worst case scenario. Oh, there it is. Yep.
Sure.
Good.
Well, Justin, I suppose I'm not sure I did very well trying to keep this concise and keep it brief. I've never had that as a strong point of mine, but...
I'm fairly scattered because when I'm thinking or talking about things, I'm pulling in from everywhere, and like, oh yeah, we're talking about this, but did you know about this thing also? And then somehow it relates, and
I can definitely identify with that.
Yeah.
But I very much appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing your deck, and I hope you have a fantastic evening.
I will too. Thank you for being such a generous host.
Not a problem. So you take care of yourself, and I'll See you on the Facebook.
Indeed.
Well, with our deck deconstruction having drawn to a close, I'll just conclude this video by saying thank you once again for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this first deck-centric analysis and discussion. Please leave a comment sharing your own thoughts and opinion regarding not just this old one-eyed deck list, but also your stance and suggestions regarding this deck deconstruction series as a whole. The goal was to remain concise, but ever informative, and with less emphasis on video editing, I should be able to produce many additional entries in this series relative to other videos fairly quickly. But whether you liked this concept or found it ultimately flawed, interacting with viewers remains the highlight of this and all projects, and I look forward to comments. Plus, if you have a deck list of your own you'd potentially like featured in a future video, I encourage you to get in touch. But with that said, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you've not done so already. If you are already subscribed, you're encouraged to share this content, as the more eyes there are on this video, the more potential new players we might draw to this game, and as a result, serve only to ever expand our Conquest community. Please feel free to contact me directly or keep in touch through any form of social media you'd like, but in any case, thank you once again for watching, and as always, be sure to check back in again soon for ever more Conquest LCG content to come.